Yes, we're coming into hard times, we're coming into things we've never seen, and the war will rage all around us, yet my Father just laughs at night, and my fear is falling prey to the love I've given away.
I don't seek applause. I seek the security and peace and prosperity and the future of the Jewish state. The Jewish people have sought their place under the sun for 3,000 years, and we're not about to be swayed by mistaken policies that have caused great, great damage. Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders.
The vote in the United Nations was about preserving the two-state solution. That's what we were standing up for. Israel's future is a Jewish and democratic state, living side by side in peace and security with its neighbors.
No one wants peace more than the people of Israel. Israel remains committed to resolving the outstanding differences between us and the Palestinians through direct negotiations. This is how we made peace with Egypt. This is how we made peace with Jordan. It's the only way we'll make peace with the Palestinians.
The truth is that trends on the ground, violence, terrorism, incitement, settlement expansion, and the seemingly endless occupation, they are combining to destroy hopes for peace on both sides and increasingly cementing an irreversible one-state reality that most people do not actually want.
Here's what President Obama himself said at the UN in 2011. He said, "Peace is hard work. Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. If it were that easy, it would have been accomplished by now." That's what President Obama said, and he was right. And until last week, this was repeated over and over again as American policy. Secretary Kerry said that the United States cannot vote against its own policy. But that's exactly what it did at the UN.
They can choose to live together in one state, or they can separate into two states. But here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
I don't think a lot of people fully understand the complexity of this. I'm going to just quickly show you this little map. All that green, those are Arab Muslim countries. You can't even see it, but there's a tiny little red dot right there. That's Israel. Now, Israel has 1/640th of the landmass of all those Muslim countries. In John Kerry's fantasy, Israel is supposed to give up land and give it to people who could get it from those who have 640 times the amount of land that Israel had.
Far too often, the Palestinians have pursued efforts to delegitimize Israel in international fora. We have strongly opposed these initiatives, including the recent wholly unbalanced and inflammatory UNESCO resolution regarding Jerusalem.
They pay people a monthly salary if they kill a Jew. They name streets after people who kill Jews. They do not include on their maps Israel, any form of Israel, because they don't believe it should exist. Israel has offered, back in 1995, Ehud Barak offered basically 95% of the Israeli land to get peace with Arafat. Arafat turned it down. Look, the Palestinians don't want peace. They want to destroy Israel. Golda Meir said it best back in 1972, there will be peace in the Middle East when Palestinian mothers love their own children more than they hate Jewish children.
We have it on absolutely incontestable evidence that the United States organized, advanced, and brought this resolution to the United Nations Security Council. We'll share that information with the incoming administration. Some of it is sensitive. It's all true. You saw some of it in the protocol released in an Egyptian paper. There's plenty more. It's the tip of the iceberg.
And for John Kerry to defend it and for him not to try to stand against it and veto it is a betrayal of our ally.
obviously goes well beyond settlements. Trends indicate a comprehensive effort to take the West Bank land for Israel and prevent any Palestinian development there. Today, the 60% of the West Bank known as Area C, much of which was supposed to be transferred to Palestinian control long ago under the Oslo Accords, much of it is effectively off limits to Palestinian development.
I think the United States, if it's true to its word, or at least if it's now true to its word, should now come out and say we will not allow any resolutions, any more resolutions in the Security Council on Israel, period. Not we will bring or not bring, we will not allow any, and stop this game, the charades.
Matt raises one final question. Is ours the generation that gives up on the dream of a Jewish democratic state of Israel living in peace and security with its neighbors? Because that is really what is at stake. Now, that is what informed our vote at the Security Council last week. The need to preserve the two-state solution. And both sides in this conflict must take responsibility to do that. We have repeatedly and emphatically stressed to the Palestinians that all incitement to violence must stop. We have consistently condemned all violence and terrorism. And we have strongly opposed unilateral efforts to delegitimize Israel in international fora.
I think that the decisions that are vital to Israel's interests and the future of its children, they won't be made through speeches in Washington or votes in the United Nations or conferences in Paris. They'll be made by the government of Israel around the negotiating table, making them on behalf of the one and only Jewish state, a sovereign nation that is the master of its own fate. And one final thought. I personally know the pain, the loss, and the suffering of war. That's why I'm so committed to peace. Because for anyone who's experienced it, as I have, war and terror are horrible. I want young Palestinian children to be educated like our children for peace. But they're not educated for peace. The Palestinian Authority educates them to lionize terrorists and to murder Israelis. My vision is that Israelis and Palestinians both have a future of mutual recognition, of dignity, mutual respect, coexistence. But the Palestinian Authority tells them that they will never accept and should never accept the existence of a Jewish state. So I ask you, how can you make peace with someone who rejects your very existence?
In the end, we could not, in good conscience, protect the most extreme elements of the settler movement as it tries to destroy the two-state solution. We could not, in good conscience, turn a blind eye to Palestinian actions that fan hatred and violence. It is not in U.S. interest to help anyone on either side.
See, this conflict is not about houses or communities in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, the Gaza district, or anywhere else. This conflict is and has always been about Israel's very right to exist. That's why my hundreds of calls to sit with President Abbas for peace talks have gone unanswered. That's why my invitation to him to come to the Knesset was never answered. That's why the Palestinian government continues to pay anyone who murders Israelis a monthly salary. The persistent Palestinian refusal to recognize a Jewish state remains the core of the conflict, and its removal is the key to peace. Palestinian rejection of Israel and support for terror are what the nations of the world should focus on if they truly want to advance peace.
And during the time of the process, as it went out, we made clear to others, including those on the Security Council, that it was possible that if the resolution were to be balanced and it were to include references to incitement and to terrorism, that it was possible the United States would then not block it, that if it was balanced and fair. That's a standard practice with resolutions at the Security Council. The Egyptians and the Palestinians and many others understood that if the text were more balanced, it was possible we wouldn't block it. But we also made crystal clear that the President of the United States would not make a final decision about our own position until we saw the final text. In the end, we did not agree with every word in this resolution. There are important issues that are not sufficiently addressed or even addressed at all. But we could not in good conscience veto a resolution that condemns violence and incitement and reiterates what has been for a long time the overwhelming consensus and international view on settlements.
Israel looks forward to working with President-elect Trump and with the American Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to mitigate the damage that this resolution has done and ultimately to repeal it.
The fifth thing I intend to do on my first day in office is begin the process of moving the American Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital. You know, a lot of presidential candidates, Republican and Democrat, have made that same promise. And yet, inevitably, when they get to the White House, their team comes up and says, you know, if we do that, there will be a lot of other people in the Middle East unhappy with us.
The definition of the 1998 Rome Statute, it says, the crime of apartheid is defined as inhuman acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. Now that would apply to an Adolf Hitler. That did apply in the case of South Africa. It does not in any possible imagination or universe apply in any possible sense to the Jewish state of Israel. And yet that is what our Secretary of State said last Friday in reference to our greatest ally. Our Secretary of State needs to apologize humbly to the people of Israel, and then he needs to tender his resignation immediately to the President of the United States. But our Secretary of State didn't stop there. He went on to reiterate a statement that he had made prior that merely was an echo of what the Palestinians had intimated. It was this: that Israel could be looking at a third intifada. That is a war. That Israel could look at a war by the Palestinians, by people who would engage in terrorist acts against Israel. That Israel could be looking at the threat of another war if they fail to give up 40% of their land to people who, number one, don't recognize that Israel has the right to exist, and number two, that they have a right to exist as a Jewish state, and number three, that they have the right to defend themselves. Since when do we force our greatest ally to sit down with people and negotiate with people who want to see them killed and annihilated?
Indeed, my colleague, the senior senator from Arizona, has suggested that the foreign policy carried out by Mr. Kerry is the equivalent of a, quote, human wrecking ball. Mr. President, the fact that Secretary Kerry sees nothing wrong with making a statement comparing Israel's policy to the abhorrent apartheid policies of South Africa, and doing so on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day, demonstrates a shocking lack of sensitivity to the incendiary and damaging nature of his rhetoric. Mr. President, sadly, it's my belief that Secretary Kerry has proven himself unsuitable for the position he holds. And therefore, before any further harm is done to our national security interests and to our critical alliance with the nation of Israel, that John Kerry should offer President Obama his resignation.
A short time ago, we heard a tweet from the president-elect Donald Trump. He said, and I quote, "As to the UN, things will be different after January 20th.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem."
I am so outraged I can't even hardly contain myself. What Obama did today was basically extend a real nice final farewell and wave to Israel and to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He just bothered to use one finger in the middle of his hand to do it. This is the most amazing position he could have taken. If Donald Trump gets to, the first thing he does, I hope, is send some jackhammers over to Turtle Bay neighborhood in Manhattan and jackhammer the whole United Nations off into the East River and float it to wherever it needs to go. But this is an insult, not just to Israel, but this is an insult to every person who loves freedom. And when people use the term settlements, they may think of the Israelis building, a bunch of tents or mobile homes. These settlements are communities and neighborhoods with schools and curbs and gutters and synagogues and shops and permanent structures where people live and raise their families. And Judea and Samaria belong to Israel. Obama is even saying that the Western Wall ought to be part of territory that's given back. This is insane. This is so beyond anything we've seen in 40 years. It's just stunning.
Well, let me tell you the first thing that the president-elect did do, Donald Trump tweeting out after the vote, "As to the UN, things will be different after January 20th. What do you expect the president-elect to do? What will his response be, or should it be, Governor Huckabee?
I think he ought to say that we're not going to continue to spend money funding the UN if they're going to be doing stupid and, frankly, idiotic things that are hurtful to any hope of peace. There's no peace ever going to happen from going along with the state-sponsored terrorist of Iran. Here's what we've done, Sandra. For the past few years under this administration, we have been kissing the backside of the Iranians, the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world, and we have been kicking the backside of the only real, true, loyal friend we have in the entire Middle East, the Israelis. Now, somebody explain why that makes any sense, even in a world of insanity like we sometimes see in the diplomatic world. This doesn't make sense.
The John Kerry speech last week was without any historical precedent at all. No perspective. When he made the ridiculous and irrational statement that Israel can either be a Jewish state or it can be a democracy, but it can't be both, my first reaction was, Mr. Secretary, it is both. It is a Jewish state and it is a democracy. But as I realized, the only way that statement makes any sense at all is if you take faith and religion completely out of the equation of who Israel is. Then what he says may have some basis in meaning. Because the fact is, there is no explanation for Israel apart from God's unique and personal involvement not only in the creation of this nation, but also in being able to sustain it. There is no other explanation other than God for how Israel has been able to reassemble, how it's been able to maintain indigenous roots in this land for over 3,000, going on 4,000 years, for how this land has truly seen the dry bones live again and the desert bloom. I first came here in 1973, just months before the Yom Kippur War, almost 44 years ago. Over the course of these 44 years, what I've observed is that this struggling little economy and sleepy little country that was just getting along at that time in terms of being able to live off the kibbutzim has become an amazing country that is the leader in technology, It's been a remarkable short period of time in which Israel has become one of the most entrepreneurial nations in the history of mankind. People can give all kinds of explanations. In the same way they can give all kinds of explanations for how Israel has won wars it should not have won. But I think for many of us there's only one explanation. And that is, there is a God. He has chosen this land for His people. And He has kept His hand on this land and His people. And anyone who believes He will not continue to do that will live to regret that false and foolish belief. And this is what John Kerry doesn't understand. So I say to my friends in Israel, be grateful for the wonderful history that you have. Never shy from it. Proclaim it joyfully and proudly, because it is a history that not only explains where you have been, but is the only explanation to explain to the world where you in fact will continue to go. Your history. This is your homeland. So to those who would believe that there should be a, quote, two-state solution, just reminder, a two-state solution is what diplomats propose to keep themselves busy rather than facing the reality that trying to split up Jerusalem is really like asking Solomon to cut the baby in half. Solomon knew better, and we should as well. But I want to conclude today with words of hope. Not history, not hatred, not even words of a homeland, but words of hope. In America, we just went through an election that defied all odds. Some would call it a miracle. Yeah. For some of us, it was only half a miracle. The miracle would have been that I would have been elected president. But as the Rolling Stones so brilliantly opined in that great theological treatise, you can't always get what you want. Many of us have said to Donald Trump, and I'm proud to have supported him after I was out of the race, proud to call him a friend, and proud to say I think he's going to be a great president. But many of us have said to him, go big and go bold. Do not let the people in Washington drag you into their quagmire of inaction and nothingness. In America, there is a statement that we often use that says, go big or go home. I would say to Israel, you too are at an important point. Just as America needs to go big and go bold, I would say to Israel, go big, and you already are home.
When Kerry called Israel an apartheid state, I went to the Senate floor and called for Kerry's resignation, and when he... And I would note that we need more senators, both Republicans and Democrats, that likewise call for accountability when the Secretary of State uses language that undermines the safety and security of our allies. And that's the second thing we need to do, is we need to stand by our allies. You know, all of us knew early in the Obama administration there were warning signs when in the opening weeks the President sent back to the United Kingdom the bust of Winston Churchill. That was just a foreshadowing of things to come, and after 7 years we have not seen an administration more antagonistic and hostile to the nation of Israel in the entire history of this country. If I'd have suggested to you 6 years ago that the elected Prime Minister of Israel would come to America, would address a joint session of Congress, and he would be boycotted by the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, and every member of the Cabinet, our friends in the media would have dismissed that as crazy conspiracy talk. That would never happen. I'll tell you, on the eve of that speech, I organized a panel discussion with Elie Wiesel to discuss the threat of the Iranian nuclear deal. Elie Wiesel wanted that to be a bipartisan discussion. So I invited one Democrat after another Democrat after another Democrat after another Democrat. We invited roughly a dozen Democrats, and not a single Democrat was willing to stand on a stage with Elie Wiesel and discuss the Iranian nuclear deal.
What does the Bible say? The Bible says, I've set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem, that they shall never hold their peace day and night. All right? You who make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent and give him no rest till he establishes and till he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. That is Isaiah 62 from verses 6 to 7. Now, I told you people, before the election, that God had his hand on Ted Cruz. And this bill being introduced right now, okay, this bill being introduced to move, the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, is a great thing. And I'm going to share with you why this is a great thing. Of course, Donald Trump also has vowed, okay, very strongly, that he was going to make sure that the embassies moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That was one of his rallying call from the beginning.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
Now listen, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is that God was going to release something devastating to this nation for turning its back, okay, on Israel, on the most important time when Israel needed her friend, when Israel needed, okay, America, the greatest ally Israel has had for these years. When Israel needed America on that UN vote that took place, a week ago, when Israel needed the U.S. turned its back on Israel. Of course, under Obama and the Democratic Party as a whole, they turned their back on Israel. All right? And guess what? God was going to release a devastating judgment upon this nation. But because of what Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and Dean Heller of Nevada introduced into the Senate, if this bill passes and if Trump gets into the office and does exactly what he said that he was going to do, that is to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. If Trump, during his tenure as president, will support Israel, fight for Israel and support Israel, God is going to fight for this nation. I'm telling you this, God's going to fight for this nation if this nation is willing to fight for the nation of Israel. Now listen to what God said. I'm going to give you the word of God right now. That bill that passed, that the U.S. abstained from, every nation that participated in that, they're not safe anymore. Any nation that passed that bill is not safe anymore. The United States is still not safe unless they pass this bill and unless they continue progressively to support Israel. Every nation that partook of that UN vote is in danger. Now, listen to what the Lord says right now. Listen, this is the word of the Lord to America. Because of the bill that was introduced today by these 3 senators, okay? And I'm going to call their names. I'm going to introduce these senators by names, all right? Because of the bill that was introduced today, January the 3rd, all right, of 2017, by Marco Rubio of Florida, Ted Cruz of Texas, and Dean Heller of Nevada. Because of that bill that was introduced today, all right, to move the embassy to Jerusalem and recognize my eternal city, Jerusalem, as the capital of Israel, I have spared the United States from a harsh judgment that was going to be released because of your betrayal of my people during that United Nations vote. All right. I'm not going to repeat that. Now, this is the next word that the Lord said. I will still allow America to see the eruption of Yellowstone and many other eruptions, that they may know that I spoke to my servants. But the worst that will come will only come if you slow your hands from finishing this task. You must quickly pass this bill because in it lies your safety. Now let me repeat it again. The Lord said this, you will still allow America to see the eruption of Yellowstone and many other eruptions, that they may know that God has spoken to his servants. But the worst that will come will only come if you slow your hands from fulfilling or from finishing this task that you vowed to accomplish. Remember, Donald Trump, you vowed that you're going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. Okay? You have to finish that. That was a vow, an oath you made to the Lord. And the Lord is holding you accountable, Mr. President, to accomplish what you have promised to his people. You must quickly pass this bill because in it lies the safety of America.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.